Hi, and welcome to another episode of In the Spotlight, where we shine a light on entrepreneurs, SMEs, and innovators. I'm Maxine Crow, your host, and I'm absolutely delighted to have my dear friend Gaia with us today. Hi, Gayatree, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Hi, everyone. How are
I
you
think
doing today?
really well, and just for the audience, so Gaia and we are part of the wonderful Gleek mentor community where we share our knowledge as industry experts to help others learn and have a real global impact on their upskilling and their human developing their human skills. And it's a really great community, and I'm so blessed and grateful because that's what's brought us together.
Certainly has been. And it's nice. It's nice, especially when you meet people from different walks of life and see how their journey has transformed into where they are today. So, like, even listening to your story, Maxine, very inspiring.
Thank you. However, the spotlight is on you today. So without further ado, introduce yourself to us, Gaia, and let us know what inspires you.
Well, I'm from Trinidad. I live in Norway now, so I live in Stavanger. I am a mother, love being a mother. I think that's the best role that I have in everything that I do. But I practice as a psychotherapist and as a behavioral consultant. I started up on my own just over a year ago, but I have been in practice as a psychologist, UK trained for 20 years this year. So I think that has informed all the decisions of going on my own, having my own practice. It's online because everything now seems more accessible online. But as a consultant, I work with consultants globally. So my practice is online globally as well.
Mhm.
But as a consultant, I work with other consultancies globally.
Yeah, and just tell us a little bit about your journey and some of the challenges that you've faced. So, how did you get to where you are today?
Um, so my first thought of a career was actually in HR. And it's one of those things that has never appealed to me. The thought of, I mean, I started off with it when I was 18 and in university and earning some money. Then I moved to the UK when I was 20, and that was the easiest way to earn money while in university as well.
Yeah.
So I paid my way through living in London for 7, 8 years of my life with HR. But in my second year in the UK, which I was 21 at that time,
Yeah.
I started volunteering with NGOs across London. So I did like Barnardo's, I did Victim Support London. I tried different NGOs, and I found that in the interactions with the humans, I felt more gratification in what I was doing. So I disappointed my family and dropped everything HR and decided to go into psychology. I think I almost caused a hashtag my dad because I called them and I said, I don't think I'm going to continue with the masters in human resource management. And I put the phone down.
Because you didn't want to wait for the answer.
So, but after time, he was generous enough to help me through paying for the masters in psychology. So I do have that qualification, but it all stemmed from doing volunteer work in the UK.
Mhm.
Um, and I loved it. I think for me, that is where I felt as though I had the biggest contribution. So I just developed that. I did also a master's in law because I loved working with NGOs and I love the idea of shifting policy in any way that we can. And it was also based on human rights law. So that in itself, I think, fed that need for change and I don't know, what do you call it? That way of looking at life through the lens of everybody else's experience.
Mm-hmm.
Um, then I went back to Trinidad. I think it was in 2008. I went back to Trinidad. And in 2009, after all the training that I did over the years, my specialization from the age of 21 to 28 was around sexual trauma and trauma focused therapy. And I went back in 2008, and in 2000, at the end of 2008, I just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I was sexually assaulted. And that shifted a lot of how I practiced as a psychologist. I think that was a big turning point in recognizing the type of practice I wanted to engage in. So, from having a very structured theoretical framework of what being a therapist is at that point in time, I mean, I was quite young, 28. Um, that entire experience shifted the idea of um, trauma for me, because it went from textbook knowledge to really not understanding how this is applicable to me. Like, there was no way I could rationalize everything that I've always, practiced with other clients
Yeah.
and engage with it myself. I felt as though I was losing constantly, because you know it, but there's nothing to adjust in your brain that feels as though it's going to create any healing for you.
Yeah.
So that was a massive shift for me. I sat on the other side of the couch, um, and yeah, there was a time when people said you should not really be doing this type of work anymore. You should shift the type of clients that you have.
Yeah.
I think at that point in time, my primary population was at-risk populations in Trinidad. So I was working with, I want to say, at-risk communities where low income, high crime rates, small gangs, large gangs,
Yeah.
um, women experiencing violence. And I remember more than once I was told I should no longer work with these populations because it was triggering for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And realistically, I mean, there's a part of your brain that always asks, but why have you chosen this for so long?
Yeah.
There's a part of your brain that wonders, like, you've done this, you're good at it, but why did this have to happen to you? And why would you have chosen this all these years? And yeah, I just continued. I did the work I did the work with a really good therapist.
Yeah.
I had to go through, I think, three different psychologists. Um, and their way of doing therapy did not in any way feel as though I was healing. I remember going from couch to couch. It sounds like if you were like if you're testing different modes of practice, but
Yeah.
I was, because I was really traumatized in that I couldn't function. I was physically not able to walk for a long time. I had like broken bones on my face or along my body. There were fractures. So there was a lot of things that wasn't um, healed in a
Yeah.
physical. So like I was literally moving from person to person, trying to find that space where I felt as though I can just be and be broken, but feel safe being broken,
Yeah.
feeling.
Until you're ready to stop
Yeah,
healing. Mm.
yeah. And a lot of times I felt as though I did not get that. I felt as though, and I'll say with three different therapists, I didn't get that, um, because part of it I physically present as broken. You can see the
Yeah.
fracture, you can see it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
people dive straight into the experience of what you've experienced. But I wasn't ready to share that.
Yeah.
It almost felt as though I was being forced to take things out of me that I wasn't ready to share with the world at that point in time.
Yeah.
And that happened with three different therapists. And then I met this wonderful lady. Um, I'm going to say her name. Her name is Mrs. Maureen Murray. And I still talk to her to today. Absolutely love her. And every day, every week for at least 3 years, I saw her.
Mhm.
And then afterwards, when I started to go back more into working with vulnerable populations, she became my supervisor. So I
Mhm.
had my healing process, which was quite a long period of time. And then I made a conscious choice to start engaging these populations actively again. So I ended up leaving a well paid um, private practice and going to the Rape Crisis Society, working with the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, doing more work in NGOs rather than private, where I went back to when I was like in the UK and I was like feeling as though I was giving back in the right way and I felt more fulfilled. So I
Yeah.
went back into that space and she became the mentor to help guide me through my own triggers.
Mm.
And it's 15 years later, and she's still a massive part of my life. I no longer sit opposite her in a therapy room, but I still know that she's one of those persons I can reach out to, and still engage and still feel safe. Because she's seen the journey on different aspects of my life, even having my daughter, she was part of that journey as well.
Yeah.
You know, everything she's been part of. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question. I feel like we went from one place to
We did.
another place.
We did, and you know, it's very courageous to share your story, and I know we did have that conversation. And what would you say to those in our audience that are listening that may have experienced trauma or things that they don't know how to begin that healing process? What would you say to them?
I uh, I think if I have to reflect back on my own starting point, I think finding that system of support initially, I think that was my biggest struggle. Um, and sometimes it's absolute strangers. You may think I had family members, but I've
Mhm.
also had thousands of clients who have walked similar shoes. Um, I had family members, but for most of the clients that I've had over the years, with the populations that I've worked with, it's absolute strangers who have been their support system, that have given them the positivity, the energy that comes with positivity
Yeah.
to reach out for the help that they need. Because help is out there. Um, there are organizations. I've worked in the UK. I've been exposed to the same NGOs in the US. I've definitely worked throughout the Caribbean. In Norway, I live in Norway. There is accessibility. So there is accessibility even online to find resources.
Yeah.
But the first step is always the hardest because you almost feel alone, especially with sexual trauma. I can say there's a level of loneliness, of shame that you can easily feel if you don't have the right support system around you.
Mm.
You can feel as though your experience is, I don't want to use validated, but you almost feel as though people can easily look at it in terms of it being you attracted that to yourself. And from my work, I mean, it's 20 years of doing this. I
Yeah.
think over 90% of the women and men who experience sexual trauma, they have that feeling that in some way they attracted that trauma to them, that experience. And I mean, when we look at all the factors, it's very untrue, but there's a lot of social dynamics with different populations. And that in itself easily informs how we perceive ourselves. So there was a massive framework in my timeline
Mm.
where I blamed myself for what had happened to me. So I only expect that a lot of people do that at some point in their
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. You know, it's quite interesting where you say that you work with NGOs. So just for the audience, remind me, it's non-government organization.
Non-governmental organizations,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to the workplace, um, it's quite an interesting dynamic as well, because I remember years ago in the workplace where there was things around harassment and being able to report, and I do remember an instance that I had in the workplace, and that person was dismissed from the role many years ago now. But it is very easy to jump to for people to jump to assumptions and conclusions. And I remember you telling me, and thank you for sharing, thank you for sharing that and with us today. So Guy, I remember you telling me about this amazing framework that you've created. Yes, I'm putting it out there. So would you like to share that with us, and you know, just talk a bit about what the future looks like for you as in this field as well?
Maxine, I have spoken to you about so many of my frameworks.
Which one would you like to share with us today?
Okay,
You
so
must see them one day, you know that, don't you?
I know. Well, recently, I think I don't know which one you're speaking about, because I shared so much with you in terms of as a consultant and as working with the NGOs. But I know in one of our recent conversations, I was talking about some of the work we're doing around empowering young girls, and we were speaking about agency and how we interpret agency, and how sometimes. So I'm from the Caribbean, where we have such a colorful history, and in Trinidad there's a history that comes from the Africans as well as the Asians. So that's the Indians and the Chinese, and there's also with the Syrians. So there's such, I want to say, a callaloo of cultures and history that make up the generation that exists right now. And in that, recently we are one of the NGOs that I work with. It's the Nina Young Woman Leadership Program, and we got some funding with the Spotlight Initiative, and we were able to do some fantastic research along the Caribbean. And I think it was 5 countries, and it was just over 100 girls that we worked with, interviewed, and did a lot of work in trying to find out how they empower themselves and how do they transform what they know into surviving in the communities. And what came out of it is that the idea of empowerment is so different, because there's so much intergenerational and transgenerational cultural norms that have filtered into this generation's understanding of what woman empowerment, what young girls empowering themselves, it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes we forget that when we look at studies from around the world. So, like, I don't know if this was the framework, but I certainly remember being so enthusiastic and excited to say that if we can get like an understanding based on understanding different histories and what has shifted over the years with girls and generations, and the normative values and cultures that came from our ancestors, and how they did things, and informing how we empower young girls and how we look at leadership today, because we're kind of grooming the leaders of the future, right?
Yeah.
I have a young daughter, and I always say that I've learned things so differently from you, that when it's your time to be a leader in your own right, or maybe she is already, but in your own right when it's your turn. How you look at it and how it transforms into what you're doing is going to be so different. It's going to look so different from how I do it or how her grandparents would have done it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's the framework that you were talking about, but that's the work that I'm also doing.
Yeah, that is one of them. And interestingly, so the industry that I'm in facilities management, there was a report that came out a couple of weeks ago that there's our industry only has 20% is representation is women and women in senior positions as well. So it's so important. You're absolutely right. The leadership and encouraging our young female generation to step into and not be afraid of, if they want to be future leaders, why not, is what I say. And if we can do as much as we can now to be role models for them and encourage them to walk their path and their purpose, then that's an amazing achievement. Yeah, there was a model that you were describing to me, and I said to you, do you know that you could create that in, I can't remember what it was.
I've done so much since then. I remember it was looking at a leadership framework, the servant leadership framework.
Yes,
was it that one?
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, I was looking at it, and I think I can't remember what I was linking it to. I think it was in terms of change and performance management. I think that was it.
I think that was the one.
Yeah. And I've been doing more research on that. Funny enough that you mentioned that. I've been doing some more research on it, and I've partnered with a really good friend of mine who he's doing a PhD, and his specialization is around STEM and emotional intelligence. And I mean, we're human skills people, right? So emotional intelligence is so important. And we're actually looking at leadership in terms of a framework that brings in brings in leadership, but kind of like the same way I looked at it with empowerment in the Caribbean, shifting the perspective a bit based on the populations that we're working with. Yeah. So as I said, I'm from the Caribbean again. So a big part of it is looking at Caribbean history and how there have been formations and institutions in the way that we've learned how to manage people, how we've learned in terms of education, in terms of how we understand teamwork. I'm not saying it's the right way we understand teamwork, but how we understand it. Yeah. How it's being translated in the workplace today by my generation and the generation before me, and what I'm finding is that, and this is my own interactions in the Caribbean, at least in the last few years, is that it's so systematic that I feel as though human skills and emotional intelligence, it's almost like I wonder if it's really being utilized and developed, Yeah. So from the last time I spoke to you about that entire thing, it's been transforming and evolving. So that's where that's at. There's a lot of new stuff that's happening.
Yeah, and it's quite important as well, because being in the UK, and there's a great emphasis with corporations and organizations for diversity, the inclusion, and whilst looking at that diversity, being in as a behavioral psychologist, it's really important that emotional intelligence and all that support comes for diverse, females and every other form of diverse person that we have. Oh gosh, I'm not explaining that very well.
I get what you're saying.
all of the diverse diversity that cultures that we have. So it is important. I'm going to ask you, what does the future look like for you?
Do you know, I'm actually really excited about it. because every time I feel as though, and I think it's the approach I'm taking now, like I'm saying yes a lot. So I said yes to you, right?
I'm so glad you did.
So I haven't said no, and it's what? It's the 20th of March. So far I've not said no for this year. So I'm saying yes quite a lot. And that has led me to a lot of new adventures. So I'm trying to continue that approach of looking at opportunities and not looking at it in terms of what I can't do, but how I can shift a perspective.
Yeah.
So even in areas where I feel as though my skill set is not necessarily the most relevant in the big scheme of things, I am not saying no to being a part of something that can shift that change. And I think I'm going back in a reflective way to where I was when I started wanting to be who I am, which was 21, 22, and asking that question of myself, can I transform something into something that my daughter would be proud to be a part of?
Yeah.
So the future looks as though I'm going to be saying yes a lot.
And what's the best piece of advice that you could give to someone? What's some wisdom that you've learned that you can pass on to our audience?
One of the things you said to me recently, I don't know if you remember having a conversation, and I was stuck. I think it was the end of last year. I was stuck. There was a lot of things happening, and we had a conversation. And I remember wanting to go into the forest and just like sit, because that's what I do a lot. I find my space and I sit. And you pulled out this thing that you are the magic. The magic.
Oh, the magic. Oh, yeah. I've got it on my wall here. The magic you are looking for is in the work you are avoiding.
That's it. That's it. And do you know, since you share that with me, it pops up all the time. It's I have this weird theory that AI is spying on me all the time. But since you've said that to me, I've seen it so many times, and it's also been translated very differently. In a way that the work that you need to do for yourself, it's the one that you're avoiding. The challenges that look like mountains and hurdles, those are the ones that you need to climb. And more I'm relying on instinct and really putting myself in a position of looking into the future and being the best person that I am right now to be that person in the future. And doing the work that I need to do so that the magic continues.
I love that. So Gaia, share with us a book, podcast, or resource that's been particularly influential for you.
There's so many books. I didn't even know you were going to ask me that one. I'm not big into podcasts a lot, but in terms of reading and understanding human behavior, I love listening to Dr. Gabor. I love listening to him in terms of how he talks about abuse and trauma. I still love Deepak Chopra, and I still love listening back to when he used to do podcasts with Wayne Dyer. So if I have to choose any podcast on any day to listen to, I go on YouTube and I do Deepak Chopra, Wayne Dyer all the time. It's my go-to still, after how many years? Still.
I remember trying to get you to listen to some Jordan Peterson, but
you really influenced me, because I've started listening to him and I'm taking what I like from it.
And that's the key. That is the key, isn't it, really? There's just so much knowledge, so much out there, and it's not about, oh my God, consuming every single thing. It's actually, okay, take what you need take what you need,
I
and
listened. I
leave
listened.
the
I did
rest.
not say no. As I said, I'm not saying no anymore. But I listened, and I have subscribed to his I'm not really good with Instagram and social media and stuff, but I have subscribed to his Instagram handle. And there are things, yes, I'm like, but 90% of the time there's elements of it that inform some of my belief systems in terms of how I do things, in terms of how I practice as a psychologist as well. So I mean, can't say no anymore, right?
Well, you can, but only if it's the right purpose. I mean, you're not going to go jump off a cliff, are you? So, you know.
But
No,
right there.
we need to put it into context. So just before we come to the end, is there a lesson that you would like to share with our listeners, something that they can take away from our conversation today? And then finally, let us know how people can contact you and get in touch if there's anything that's resonated from our conversation today.
Certainly. I think over the years, I've learned that there isn't really a word called failure. It's just defined by someone else's own perception of their own experiences. For myself, I don't feel as though I failed at anything. It's just become feedback to do something differently, to shift the perspective, to look at something from a different angle. So that's something I've consistently been practicing and living. Because don't get me wrong, there are times I really just want to like hide under the duvet.
Duvet.
Yeah.
Sure. I get that too.
Yeah. And you just want to stay there until like you feel like someone is coming to save you and you realize nobody's going to save you, you know? So yeah, I've taken that approach, and more I'm finding myself more confident in who I am choosing to become. At this stage of my life, starting a business at 43 years old, 1 year into it later, I have no regrets about that. Shifting how I practice, I have no regrets about that. Becoming more accessible to different clienteles around the world, in terms of how I practice as a therapist. I think I feel more comfortable in that as well.
Yeah.
And working with the populations that I've worked with in the last year, I always feel as though I feel honored by the stories that I hear from my clients, both in the corporate world as well as those individuals that come to me for therapy, one-on-one. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. How can we contact you?
The simplest way is via email. It's info@gayatreedipchan.com.
Okay, thank
So
you.
it's
And
my
I will
full
share.
name.com.
I will share that with
Yeah.
everyone as well.
Thank
I
you,
want
ma'am.
to just thank you from the bottom of my heart for your time today. I love spending time with you, and you must let me know when you're back in the UK again so that we can have a catch up.
I've been thinking about that. So yes, definitely. I'm really thinking strongly about that these days.
So everyone, this has been Gayatree Dipchan on In the Spotlight. Thank you, and until next time, this has been In the Spotlight with Gayatree. Take care, everybody. Thank you for listening.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.